I've seen the anime of Rurouni Kenshin 6 times. The most recent time that I watched it, I saw it in dub. All of the other times I watched it in sub. I've seen the OVA series of Trust and Betrayal countless times. I've watched the movies countless times as well, and I've also read the manga. So needless to say, I really love Rurouni Kenshin, but it is not a perfect series. The story of Rurouni Kenshin is a fictional take on history set in Japan after the country was split in two between the war of the shogun and the emperor. This is set 10 years after the abolishment of the samurai class. This story follows the life of a retired assassin who was so skillful that he basically crafted the future of Japan with his own hands, which he soaked in blood. And because of these atrocities which he has committed, he now seeks a life of atonement where he will kill no one else. This man was known all across Japan. He was so deadly and struck down so many people with godlike speed, he was known as Batosai the Manslayer. In the beginning of the story, we meet this Batosai the Manslayer, but he is not such a violent and ruthless killer like you would imagine. He's actually a kind-spirited, very humble man who wanders Japan with a reverse blade sword trying to help out everyone around him. His sword, the blade of it is not on the front, it's on the back, and it's actually dull on the front, so whenever he hits someone, it will just knock them out, or maybe break a bone or something, but he will not kill them. Through Kenshin's travels across Japan, he meets many valuable friends who will help him out in many situations, and also very powerful enemies who will take him to the brink of returning to his manslayer ways. This anime is 94 episodes long, divided between 3 seasons. The first season is somewhat episodic as we get to learn the characters and meet everyone and see all of these smaller arcs. The second season is all together in one large arc, which is arguably one of the best arcs in shonen anime, and the third season is complete filler. If you're watching the anime, or if you're planning to watch this anime and you don't read manga at all, then you will not have a complete feeling when watching this. You will not have a proper ending to the story. The anime gives you one filler episode, which kinda wraps everything up from the filler perspective of the series, but as far as the major story and the bulk of these characters, it really does nothing, so you need to read the manga. Although the Kenshin anime misses out on the most crucial elements of its story from the manga, the parts that it does contain from the manga are adapted perfectly, and it is beautiful. There were times when I was rewatching the anime that I could pause it at a specific point, hold the manga up to it, and see that it looks exactly the same. Actually, my biggest complaint with the manga was just that it wasn't animated, and that's just because it's manga. When watching the anime, the fights were amazing. Honestly, a lot of the fights in the anime, I preferred them over the fights in the manga, just because so many things happen within these fights. You'll have characters with godlike speed, and you need to see this animation. Looking into the fights of the anime, they were done beautifully. So much suspense and so much excitement that you get when watching these. You can see their expressions, so much stress that they're going through. You could see with their bodies just getting destroyed, getting burnt, getting cut, getting smashed. There were times when you will feel for these characters, like with Sanosuke, he gets his hand broken, and you will see the bones broken, his fingers misshapen, it's wrapped in bandages, just dripping blood, but he has the determination to continue punching the guy. And with Kenshin, you will see him get burned and cut, and there's even a part where somebody bites a large chunk of his flesh out of his shoulder, and he continues to fight. The way that all of these fights are animated, it's not the same way that you see the regular animation of the series. The characters don't look as innocent or as cute as they would within these fights. Their personality changes as they get their game face on, and also, coupled with the voice acting, both sub and dub, these fights were done great. So when watching Season 1, it's basically a setup of Kenshin's group where he meets all of his major allies throughout the series, and of course he meets a few villains as well that will stick around. Whenever I think about the first season of Rurouni Kenshin, I think about these 2 smaller arcs, and then I feel that everything else is kind of trivial, and it's not filler, but it really adds nothing to the story. The first major, smaller arc within this first season is one where Kenshin fights against an ex-Shinsengumi member who is the first terrifying villain of the series, who can freeze you in a glance. The second smaller arc here is when Kenshin fights against a drug dealer who also is an arms merchant who employs the help of the Oniwaban group, which is a group of very powerful ninjas, and Kenshin and his group has to fight against them. So to be honest with you, whenever I think about this first season, I mainly think about those two parts that I just described to you. Everything else seems kind of trivial, and it really brings nothing to the story, and to be honest, this first season, I feel that it's kind of boring and very slow paced, and I've seen it so many times, so it's understandable. So I've already given credits to the fights within Rurouni Kenshin. Another thing that I have to give this series credit for is the way that it fleshes out its characters, and it makes you feel for a lot of these characters, not only the heroes, but also the villains as well. You get the first taste of these great villains with these great stories with the Oniwaban group, because at first for them, they seem like these typical villains that are out to defeat the main characters, and it's really nothing special. But then, as you continue watching these episodes, you see that these characters have heart, they all have their own backgrounds, and they all care deeply for each other. Seeing the small stories of these characters within the Oniwaban group and seeing how much they care for each other really sets the trend within this anime, showing a lot of villains with a lot of great stories behind them. So after finishing up with Aoshi Shinomori and his Oniwaban group, we're slowly led into Season 2, which is one massive story that embodies the spirit of having these villains that you really do care for. So the second season is called the Kyoto arc, which you've probably heard before because it is legendary within shonen anime. The entire second season spans this one story where the main antagonist is actually Kenshin's successor. When Kenshin retired from being the assassin, this man took over, Makoto Shishio. So after the war ends, the Imperialists decide that they need to cover up all of their dirty deeds by killing their major assassin, who was Makoto Shishio, by shooting him, burning him alive, and needless to say, he is pissed. So Shishio survives being shot and his entire body being burned, covered in burns, wrapped in bandages. He seeks out his revenge, gathering 10 deadly swordsmen who he calls the Jupangatana. So within the Jupangatana, not only do we find 10 very deadly swordsmen, but we also find a few people with very sad and touching stories. These 3 villains have the deepest story within the Jupangatana. The rest of the members, I really didn't care for the backstory, but for Makoto Shishio, Sojiro, and Anji, these characters stand out throughout the entire series as being one of your, or some of your favorite villains. So aside from the deeper villains within the Jupangatana, we still have Aoshi Shinomori, which we get a lot of development for him within the second season, because he still seeks revenge from the actions that took place within the first season. So with this second season, not only do you get villains with great stories to them, but you get a lot of great character interaction. Not only within the heroes and themselves, not only within the villains and themselves, but with the heroes and the villains, the way that they interact with each other. There's a lot of gray area and tension between a lot of these characters in the second season. Like on the hero side, we'll have Kenshin's group meeting up with some of the members of the Oniwaban group, which of course left over tension from things that happened within the first season, and even though they're on the same side, they don't completely trust each other. And on the villain side, we have characters such as Anji, who is a monk who will not allow the death of anyone who doesn't deserve it, so he will have some tension between some of the other villains that will indiscriminately kill. On top of that, you will have times where Kenshin will offer words of advice to some of the villains here. So one thing about the character development within Rurouni Kenshin, honestly, I feel that the villains get a better paced development than the heroes do, because you'll have this first season, which is basically the only development that you get for the majority of the heroes, which is mostly Kenshin's group. You'll have Megumi, you'll have Kaoru, Sanosuke, and Yahiko. All of these characters change as a result of something Kenshin does for them, whether he fights them or whether he helps them out, and they change because of this. But after that, it feels like they become these static characters that just stay the exact same throughout the entirety of the series. They may learn new moves, but their personalities basically stay the same. It's not that way within the manga, because after that second season ends, after that Kyoto arc ends within the manga, all of these characters undergo major story-changing developments that you do not see within the anime, but in that place of all of these developments that you get in the manga, in the anime, we have filler, where all of the characters continue to stay the same. So after a while of watching this, it can feel like the protagonists are static characters that don't change, but they do change. It's just that the anime doesn't really show it. And Kenshin, to be fair, he does get changes throughout the entirety of the anime series except for that third season, because obviously that's filler and they can't really take liberties with his character in that third season. But within the second season, he undergoes major changes when he goes back to learn the final techniques of his Hiten Mitsurugi style. So the way that I see it is, you get a lot of these villains, which get very small amounts of screen time. If you're looking at the entire series, they get this small chunk of screen time. In the screen time, you learn about them, you learn about their backstory, you get these amazing fights, and you see them change. So these small villains and their small portions in the series are actually more enjoyable than I found a lot of the main major protagonist character's story to be. So anyways, moving on to the third season, which is complete filler. A lot of people will tell you that you don't have to watch the third season, and it's kind of true. You don't necessarily have to watch it. I didn't really care for it. I found that it was very boring. It became very episodic. Mind you, some episodes were enjoyable, but for the most part, I didn't really care for it, and I was always looking for this depth of story, for this depth of character. I was looking for great fights, great development, but it just wasn't there because it's filler. Now, after reading the manga, after seeing all of these characters develop, after getting complete and perfect closure for the story, going back and watching the third season, this was the time that I enjoyed it the most out of all of the other times that I watched it. Probably because I was watching this in dub and I could just sit there and listen to it as I'm playing video games off to the side, because I've already seen it so many times already. May as well just like halfway pay attention to it, and I actually enjoyed it the most out of any other times that I watched it. So the third season here is composed of about 3 or 4 smaller arcs and also a lot of single one-shot episodes. These one-shot episodes, I really enjoyed them. There was one episode which was my favorite so far, which was when Kenshin met somebody who's impersonating him, and then he's investigating it, trying to get him to stop impersonating him, but then he realizes that the money that he's taking as impersonating him is going towards an orphanage where he's feeding these kids and he's raising these kids, and he's actually a pretty good person. And also, one thing about that episode is that this is episode 77, by the way. There are 2 characters here. Something that's very interesting to me here. There are these 2 characters that look almost exactly like Jin and Mugen from Samurai Champloo, but the thing is, that episode aired 6 years before that anime came out. So with this third season, some of the arcs that we see are, there's one guy who has also mastered the Hiten Mitsurugi style, who comes back to Japan and fights against Kenshin, and he's actually stronger than Kenshin, but I didn't really care for that because the guy had supernatural elements to him. He could control wind, he could control light in some degree. Then there's another arc where these people from China come over and they're using chi and they're controlling magic and things like that. I didn't really care for that either because it's supernatural aspects, and for the most part, Rurouni Kenshin is a hyper-realistic series. Basically everything that we've seen in Kenshin so far has been realistic to the degree of they're doing normal things such as sword fighting or fist fighting, but it's taken to the point where somebody can punch a massive hole in the wall, or with the sword somebody can move at the speed of light or cut down massive objects. But then within this third season we see people control the wind or control light, or then they have their chi. And then also we see some of this in season 2 as well, where we see one character actually walk in hell, and it didn't really make any sense because these supernatural elements to the series are really out of place in my opinion, and I don't like them, and I wish that they never added them because it really breaks up the feel of the series. That's it for the anime. You get these 3 seasons. The first season is just a build-up for all the characters. The second season is the bulk of your enjoyment for this entire series, and the third season, it's either complete garbage or it's something that is mediocre that you will mildly enjoy. So looking at the overall presentation of Rurouni Kenshin, the art style here is something that will honestly throw a lot of people off at first. After watching Trust and Betrayal, which is what got me started on Kenshin, is what got me into anime really, the art style really threw me off, and it took me years to really get into the anime because all of the characters look so cutesy with the big eyes and they look so silly. But let me just tell you that the way that these characters look, don't let that deceive you, because when they're fighting, they can look very serious. So that's actually something that works for the series, that they look very cutesy and with these giant eyes and everything, because that shows you their character. But also, it's really funny because there's a big part of the series which is comedy as well, so it works towards that. But then also, they can get very serious when they need to. So aside from the look of these characters, like I said before with the fighting, you can get a really good feel for the speed, you can get a good feel for the intensity between these two characters when they're fighting, so the way that that's animated is great. But for everything else, from a technical standpoint, it isn't the most detailed anime out there, but that's fine. It is 94 episodes long, and it was made back in 1996, so I can give it some room for that because it is a bit older. Moving on to the audio, which was another real treat. These openings, these closings, okay, Season 3 had a bad opening, I didn't really care for that, but the opening and closing for Seasons 1 and Seasons 2 were some of my favorite openings and closings out of all anime. I really love that. So moving on to that big question you've all been asking, sub versus dub. I've seen this 5 times in subtitle and then once in dub, and honestly, I was always very skeptical about the dub of this because, like I said before, that first season can be a little bit tough to get through, so there were times when I'd switch over to the dub and watch it that way, and I didn't really care for the voice acting there, and that still stands. I watched this again with the dub. The voice acting in Season 1 just wasn't as good as it was within Season 2 for some reason. Maybe the characters, or maybe the voice actors were more into character at that point or something, but I just felt that it was better in Season 2. In Season 2, the voice acting here, the English voice acting, was done beautifully. Now, there were some characters that I did not like, and this goes throughout the entire series here. There were always characters here that I did not like the voice actors for, like, say, for example, Cho, one of the Juban Gatana. I didn't like his voice acting, but then I'll have times where I'm watching this in dub or sub as well, and I have the exact same experience watching the sub or dub, where people will say things and I will get chills running down my back, like with Sanosuke versus Anji, where Sanosuke is being a bit arrogant and he punches the wall, makes this hole, and he says, "You see, I've mastered the technique. You should not fight me." And then Anji's like, "You ignorant fool, you think that is mastery?" And then he hits the wall and creates this massive crater. In English or in Japanese, that part gave me chills, and it was great voice acting. And also, the part with Kenshin versus Cho, when he was screaming as he was trying to draw the sword, that part also gave me chills and is also very memorable, not only in English, but in Japanese. Both, either English or Japanese, would be a great choice if you're going to watch the series. However, having said that, like I said, the English dub here, it's actually good. I was wrong in saying that it was bad before, but the subtitle, the Japanese audio, is still better. You have to go through this with the subtitle. There's so much emotion with this, but not only just because of the way that the voice acting is, but because the movies here, the dub with the movies, isn't really all that great. So there's this movie here, Rurouni Kenshin, Trust and Betrayal, which is a must-watch. I recommend watching this movie before the second season starts. When you see Kenshin going to Kyoto, watch this. However, in the manga, after the Kyoto arc ends, you see this part in the manga, but in my honest opinion, the Trust and Betrayal OVA is a lot better than the parts we see in the manga, even though it's kind of told differently in the manga a little bit, so I like this more. So even though it's told after that arc in the manga, I would recommend that you watch this before the Kyoto arc in the anime. This movie shows you all of Kenshin's dark and bloody past, so it's a must-watch. There are 2 other movies as well. There is the Kenshin live-action movie, which was a pretty good movie, but is basically filler and brings nothing to the story. I did enjoy it, though. And then there's The Stain on Rurouni Kenshin, not the Kyoto arc OVAs, which were pretty bad, and I recommend that you not watch them, but there is Samurai X Reflection, which takes so much liberties from the story of the manga. If you're watching the anime, this is the only closure that you're going to have. This is why you need to read the manga. They take so much liberties to the point where they kill off important major characters. I will not tell you, but if I did, you would shit yourself. It is that crazy that they did this, and even Watsuki himself discredited this movie. You need to read the manga. Reflections, they try to take things from Yahiko no Sakabato, which is a one-shot on Yahiko, and also the third arc, the third major arc within the Kenshin anime, and they try to take that and mix it all together. It simply does not work. Long story short, the anime is something that is great for fans of the manga, and if you're just getting into it, you're still going to enjoy it, but the way that you're going to enjoy the Kenshin story the most will be with the manga, hands down. Anyways, thank you all for watching. If you have seen Rurouni Kenshin anime, and of course if you've read the manga, let me know your thoughts about it in the comments section below. Don't worry about reflections. I plan on making a rant about that in general sometime within the next week. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.